This is Elizabeth Townsend. It is August 2nd, 2001. This is for Dean Massaro's Preparing for Lives in the Law project, and we're having an interview with Leslie Cohen. All right, first question, why did you go to law school, and was it what you expected when you got there?
I was very idealistic. I think I'm still very idealistic, and I went to law school because I wanted to change the world. I think I still want to change the world, but I know there's more barriers to doing that than I thought when I was in my 20s. After college, I worked for an alternative newspaper for a couple years, and it folded, and I realized I needed a way to make enough money to support myself while still doing the type of work I believed in, and law seemed a good way to do that. I went to law school at University of New Mexico, actually, so close to Arizona, and I don't know that law school was or wasn't what I expected of it. I think I had a good law school experience. I got very involved with people who were also very, very concerned about social issues, and so I had a lot of friends and colleagues who also were seeing law school and law in the way I was.
When did you go to law school?
I graduated in 1982, so 79 to 82, 80 to 82.
Do you think that people in public interest of your generation have that same, do you find that that belief system is typical of the people that you know and that are in public interest? We had someone else yesterday that said that she's not in public interest, she's kind of in a public interest space, but that they wanted to change the world and do things. And do you think is it more prevalent in public interest, and do you think that's still prevalent, or has it changed over time?
I think that oftentimes people who go into things such as public interest law, legal services, other public sector jobs often do so because of an internal ethic, philosophy, guiding force that they want to do good in the world. And I think that there may have been more of that in the late 70s, mid to late 70s than there is now. But I don't think it's because people's belief systems have changed so much, but I think the realities today are a lot harder for law students. When I went to law school, it would have been very unusual for people to be taking out very large loans to the way they are now. So there are some constraints on people now in law school having to get out of law school and perhaps make a certain amount of money because of debt. There are more people with families in law school, and other circumstances that just mean that it may be harder for them to go into public interest. I also think there's less opportunity too. Legal services, which was a large area in the 70s and 80s for people who wanted to do good in law to go into, those programs to some extent aren't as large as maybe they used to be, and there just may not be quite as many opportunities.
So for the students who don't, tell the students like what you do, and they have gotten an inkling that you're public interest now,
Mm-hmm.
but tell them, and what is public interest? Maybe you can start with that if they don't know what that means.
Public interest can be a lot of things, but a typical public interest law firm is one that's organized either around a specific population of people that are being represented or particular issues, and in general, in that firm, individual clients will not be paying the fees, but rather the priorities, the types of litigation, the types of cases and activities that are performed are part of the mission of that organization, and the funding is usually from something else than the client's fees. And that mission usually always involves something larger than assisting people on their individual legal matters, but probably involves some systemic change to occur in people's lives as the result of the legal work done. And I know that sounds very, very vague. I can give you examples here in Arizona. For example, the organization I work for, I'm the executive director of the Arizona Center for Disability Law. Our mission is to ensure that people with disabilities are free from abuse and neglect, that they have access to services, jobs, education, and housing, in order to achieve equality and maximize independence. So everything we do, the cases we bring, the public policy work we do, even individually going with folks with disabilities to help them get the mental health services they need through the mental health system, is all done in furtherance of ensuring that people with disabilities have equal rights and opportunities in our community.
And disabilities are more than just physical disabilities.
Yes, disabilities can be everything from cognitive disabilities, for example, a traumatic brain injury or mental retardation, a physical disability, someone who uses a wheelchair or has some type of, maybe is an amputee of an arm or a leg, or people with mental illness, for example, that's a disability too, or people who have degenerative diseases, or people who are HIV positive or have AIDS or have MS, or a wide variety of other disabilities.
I have lots of questions about that. We're going to start it. If the student has heard that you're an executive director of a program and they say, that's what I want to do, that's like, that's my goal, how do they get to where you got? I mean, are there do you have like some ideas on paths on how to get there? Or is it, is that too hard a question? That might be too hard a question.
I mean, I don't think that I set out to be an executive director of a legal nonprofit. If I had, I might have paid more attention to finance and budgets and things like that in my schooling. But I think that in general, my experience has been that people who get into these jobs do it by becoming an expert in their field, working as an attorney in that area or with a variety of nonprofits, and then working their way up. They tend to become supervising attorneys or program directors or project directors of a particular project within an organization, and then eventually become the director. Though other people have jobs like mine and come from completely, different paths. Some people that I've met across the country perhaps worked somewhere for a governmental entity and were some sort of a supervising person at a county attorney's office or Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So there's probably a variety of ways to do it.
Okay, and I'm going to keep asking dumb questions like this. How do you become an expert in your field?
Just through working in it year after year, gaining those experiences. I've been working in this area for 10 years now. Prior to that time, I was an attorney in private practice in a firm where I did mostly plaintiff's personal injury and medical malpractice, which was my first real introduction to the world of representing people with disabilities. And some of the cases in private practice that interested me the most had to do with people with disabilities and problems that occurred for them either through negligence of someone who was supposed to be a caretaker or a caregiver, or through failure of other systems to provide them with a safe atmosphere.
So is dealing with a client with a disability different than dealing with a client that you don't know has a disability?
I would say that something you learn in the disability field is that we always say it's to use people first language and to think of people as people first. So it's a person with a disability, not a disability person. And so the reason why I started to say that is because once you look at it that way, a person can be a jerk, a person can be a nice person, and that doesn't make much difference whether they have a disability or not. So I would start that as a generality, but more specifically, I would say that many people with disabilities, because of the stress perhaps of their own disability, the stress of often being a person living at poverty level, because if you look at the census and all other studies that have occurred, people with disabilities are much more likely to be lower income, and they are having perhaps difficulty getting housing, appropriate health care, a good job, etc. Those kinds of life stressors can make people at times very difficult to deal with because they are under a lot of pressure. It's in the same way that any client who's experiencing a lot of life stressors can be difficult at times to deal with.
Okay, I'm going to jump to something real quick, and then I want to come back for most of it to sort of the experience of being in your law firm. I mean, in your center or in a public interest, sort of the daily aspects.
Right.
But we do a lot of stuff about corporate law and big firms and all of that. If you have a disability, can you be in one of those firms, and are they very disability friendly? I mean, if you have MS, can you be at a I mean, are your choices limited in terms of what you do by your disability, or and does your center play any kind of, I mean, sort of a law student, I have ADD, or I whatever I have that I don't feel, I'm nervous about.
Well,
or does I don't know if that's a...
Well, I don't know, I don't have any access to any kind of studies on, the number of law students that graduate with disabilities and where they end up, and if the expectations in a large firm mean they're less likely to be in a large corporate firm. I mean, I certainly know people who use wheelchairs who work for large corporations. I suspect there are probably people who have mental illness who are attorneys in large firms, but I wouldn't probably know that. I do think that people who need reasonable accommodations because of their disability, and that is required under the ADA, may have a harder time in a large law firm atmosphere where there may be an expectation that everybody works 55, 60 hours a week, if that is the expectation, and if because someone's disability that would be a difficult thing to do. But I think I don't know the answer to your question. I would suspect that just as all minorities in our society have experienced difficulty breaking into all sectors, perhaps of the legal profession, that would be true for people with disabilities too.
And is it, I mean, let me ask you more about what your center, because maybe I'm off track, and so I don't want to get off track. Okay. Your center, how do people come to your center? Do people come to your center, or
yes.
How does it work?
Yes, it works in people call us up, and it can be everything from calling us up and saying, my mother's in a nursing home and I think somebody's hitting her because she has bruises that are unexplained, to a parent calling and saying, my child is entitled to special education, but they're not giving him the services that he needs, to someone saying, I've just applied for a job, and when they found out that I'm HIV positive, they withdrew the job offer. Individuals call with a wide variety of issues that are legal issues. That's one way we help people. People will call, and depending on what the issue is, will be routed to the right person. We every year adopt priorities for representation, because you could just tell by what I just told you, the variety of issues and the number of issues that people call with. There's no way that our organization, even with 2 offices in Phoenix and Tucson, and currently we have 11 attorneys, even with, and probably an equal number of non-attorney advocates, even with all of us, there would not be any way we could possibly help every person with a disability and their family members who call on their behalf with every legal problem. So we adopt priorities. Currently, the areas of our priorities are education, which is primarily special education of children, healthcare, which we include in that mental health care and health care for people with disabilities, employment, and a lot of what we do in employment is discrimination work under the Americans with Disabilities Act, access, and by access we mean access to the community. Is this law school accessible? If someone is blind, do they get Braille materials where they're going? We look at accessibility issues as well as housing issues, fair housing. Are people being discriminated against on the basis of their disability? Does someone go up to a landlord and try to rent an apartment, and when they find out that their previous address was the Arizona State Hospital, which is our state psychiatric facility, does the landlord say no? That would be discrimination. And the last area we look into is abuse and neglect of people with disabilities in institutions and group homes and nursing homes.
So someone comes up with one of the problems you mentioned.
Yeah.
What happens next?
Well,
and they pass,
yeah, well, we don't have any income requirements, so they don't have to pass a lot. We don't ask people for valid, verification that they have a disability. We really are very blessed in that kind of way. We have what we call information and referral specialists in each of those areas. So a call would be routed, say, for example, to our employment specialist, Joanne, who's an attorney who's working part-time for us, and she would listen to their issue. If it was something that would be amenable to giving some advice and some strategy on, she would then give that to the person, send them, we have instructional guides on the law, and that would be it. An example of that might be someone calls us, they work at a job, they have a hearing impairment, but they're not completely deaf. But what they need is they need an amplifier for their phone. They need, if there's any company meetings, to be sitting right in front of the speaker, or perhaps to have one of those FM loop systems so that they can hear in a large room. They may need some visual alarms, and for the phone if they're having trouble hearing the phone ring, that sort of thing. And they might call and say, I'm afraid I'll get fired if I ask for this stuff. Can I ask my employer for that? And that would be the kind of thing we would probably just give the person advice on how to do it. But then there might be somebody who calls us and says, I just, was fired from my job because I disclosed to them that I'm HIV positive, and I heard them all talking that they didn't want somebody like me working there. Something like that, then we would take the information, and that person wants help and representation. That would go to our employment team. The team's made up of lawyers and advocates working in that area. People would staff it. If it appeared something we would handle, it would then be assigned to an attorney. That attorney could do a variety of things: negotiate with the employer, file a charge on behalf of the person with the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or the Arizona Civil Rights Division. And after that administrative process, if it appeared to be a case we wanted to take further and the person wanted to go with it, we might file a lawsuit on it.
And are they charged anything for your services?
No. We don't charge clients any attorney time at all. We are funded through a wide variety of sources, primarily some federal grants for protection and advocacy of people with disabilities. We also do fundraising in the community. We also have some smaller private grants, and on cases where we are successful, either through settlement or through court order, the other side often has to pay our attorney's fees. So we do raise part of our funding every year on attorney's fees from the other side in cases where we are successful.
Okay, here's the sort of kind of off topic. When we were in my ethics class, that we had cases where public interest places that they got their attorney's fees paid, that part of the other side would make them, like as part of the settlement, that was a bargaining thing where you could get rid of the attorneys as part of the and that was a big whole class.
Yeah.
Ooh, totally insane.
Yeah.
And I just thought maybe we could talk, because since everyone's taking ethics and that's going to come up, I thought maybe you could talk about what you think about that just a little bit.
Attorney's fees for public interest or legal services have always been, I think, a difficult issue, maybe conceptually, because the other side usually is someone whose client is paying them, and their initial thought is, well, your client's not paying you anything. Why do we have to pay you? And the way that we have really dealt with it at the center is we begin when we take a case, if it is a case where attorney's fees may be awarded. If, there's a lot of things we do where attorney's fees are never an issue. I mean, probably the majority of things we do are not going to ever be fee generating cases, and they shouldn't be. We're a nonprofit, and that's not the primary reason we would ever take a case. But on cases where it looks like it's going into litigation, where it's the type of claim where we would be requesting fees from the other side, we talked to a client early on about that and what that means. And my experience of it has been that most clients really understand that for us to continue to provide the kind of services we are for them, we need to continue to have money coming into the center, and that one way we can either keep helping people or expand our services is through getting attorney's fees for the other side, so that our clients feel that it is an important part of any relief in a case that they get their relief, but that also we get compensated. And I think that maybe some of the problems with fees and other sides trying to push the client against the attorney, if the client really understands what's going on and believes in the attorney's right to get their fees as well as the client to get their relief, that there is a partnership with it. But I'd also say that clearly there have been cases we take where if the client's getting something, really good, and it seems that, we don't always get our fees. But we do more than I think we used to in the past on these.
So in those cases, do you have to keep billable hours?
We always keep time.
Always keep.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that.
Yeah. We, just because we're not billing people on a monthly basis, we keep time on our cases. And we do it the same way as probably everybody you've talked to in other firms. The activity, 6/10 of an hour. So that if there is a fee petition with a court, we definitely, have the contemporaneous time records.
So do you have any strategies or helpful hints on keeping billable hours for people who are just starting out with it? Like if you're doing activities, do you keep a sheet with you? Do you do it immediately? Is there any kind of...
it's always hard. I usually, if I'm out at a meeting or something, on whatever legal pad I'm working on, I tend to write the time, that I'm spending, and I know what the activity is because the notes are right there, and then when I get back to the office, would do it. But otherwise, on my computer, it's always up, the timesheet if I'm in my office.
What is your, we get into really specifics, what kind of, do you do it in like a table or word processing, or is it a billable hour program?
No, we would like to get into a program, but we have a table, that lists the date, the amount of time, the activity, the case, and all of that.
And do you, like for the young lawyers starting out, do you expect them to work fast, or, does a billable hour matter in how long you're taking on something matter, or,
Well, how long we're taking on something in a public interest law firm doesn't matter in the way necessarily it matters in a large firm if an attorney is more fearful that they can't bill the client because they're taking too long. But it's certainly always of concern. Anytime, we have a duty to people with disabilities in Arizona to provide the best services possible. So certainly we don't want to have a bunch of people who are spending weeks and weeks and weeks on one thing, because that means other people aren't going to be able to get help. So it would certainly become an issue for us if we felt like people, after some reasonable period of time, weren't able to handle enough work to help people.
Okay, so a daily life of a lawyer in
Yeah.
your firm, in your center, what does it look like? What time do they get there?
I don't know. People probably get there, depending on the person, maybe between 8 and 9. people do a wide variety of different things. I mean, maybe you've heard this from everybody, but I think a large part of everybody's day is taken up in answering all their email. And that's probably one of the first things I do when I get to the office is look at that. But it could be a variety of issues. And I'm a little different because I'm also administering all of this. So a lot of what I do is probably not a typical law type thing to do. For example, this morning I was on the phone talking to different public interest groups around the country because I'm looking at our salary scales right now, and I want to see what other people there aren't too many like organizations within Arizona, so I'm kind of going to other states and seeing what they do. So I mean that some of this morning I was doing that. I also was reviewing a conciliation agreement that one of our attorneys is doing in a case that's presently in the Civil Rights Division involving a wage issue for some people with mental retardation. And so I was reviewing that and making comments on that. I also this morning outlined for a training we're doing on the Americans with Disabilities Act employment provisions and other employment laws for a group of people who have a grant statewide to be benefits planners for people who are on Social Security and who are doing a return to work effort. This is kind of complicated, but there's all this federal monies out for people now who are Social Security recipients to try to get them to return to work and get off Social Security. And we have a grant to do legal work for some of those folks, but some other organizations have grants to help them through counseling, and we're doing a whole series of trainings so that the people who are doing benefits counseling will know if something is happening to spot it and put those people in the right direction. So it's kind of a variety of, so I worked on some administrative stuff, some training issues, as well as some legal documents this morning. And that would not be unusual for me. Now, some of our staff attorneys, it would tend to be more casework, which could include client interviews, negotiation with the other side on a case, hearings. I know that this morning, one of the attorneys in our office was at an administrative hearing with the Access Administration. Access is the indigent health care provider in Arizona, Arizona's Medicaid agency. And if you disagree with the decision Access has made to deny medical services, you have the right to hearing. And so one of our attorneys was representing somebody at a hearing this morning. Another one was on a conference call with a national job organization regarding one of their policies on allowing people with disabilities to join their programs and trying to reach an agreement on that. So that, to give you, one of our advocates was with a family at a meeting regarding the kids' special ed program for next year.
And so to be a lawyer in your center, do you have to have experience before you get there, or do you hire young lawyers as well? Or if you want to do that stuff, should you be off doing something else first and then come to that like you did, or sort of what paths should they be looking at?
It's difficult for us to hire attorneys straight out of law school. We have in the past, and if it was the right person, we still would, but we don't have enough attorneys to serve as mentors to have any large number of people who are just out of law school. That isn't to say we wouldn't. For example, one of our current lawyers, Rose Daly Rooney, who also teaches disability law here at the law school, she came to the center straight out of law school. She had a Skadden Arps fellowship. Skadden Arps is a law firm in New York that pays for 2 years for lawyers to work in public interest organizations. Rose had worked at the center as an advocate before she went to law school, got the Skadden Arps fellowship and came back. And that was a great situation. We currently have one attorney in our Phoenix office who this is really her first law job. However, she's someone who's worked in the disability field. She worked for the State Independent Living Council. She had some other jobs in disability-related matters. There have also been people who have interned for us or law clerked for us that if we had funding and they wanted to come work for us straight out of law school, I would love to have them do so. But I would say it's more the unusual person who either has some advocacy experience or other related experience.
So where do they go if they're not going to go to you and they want to end up in some place like you?
It's a variety of things. I will tell you, with our current staff, we have lawyers that worked at legal aid. You know, we pay better than legal aid, and so I think that we've been accused of stealing people from legal aid. But for example, we have, I think, a few people who worked a couple years as an attorney at Community Legal Services in Phoenix, and then started working for us. We have one attorney who clerked for a federal judge for I think 3 years and then worked for us, and that was good experience for us because she had watched so many trials and was so familiar with the legal procedure in federal court that it was of enormous, she wasn't starting out like a new lawyer. We have other people who've gone, another attorney like myself who came from private practice doing personal injury and medical malpractice, another attorney who was in a labor law practice in private practice for a few years. We just hired someone who worked at a big firm and also did criminal defense for 5 to 6 years. So it's a variety of things. I think what we're looking for is someone who has passion for the issues, someone who is a self-starter, because the thing about a lot of the litigation or public policy issues we address, it isn't as if somebody pulls a form complaint for you out of the drawer and says, just fill in the names and file it. Every case is different. A lot of things require real creativity in terms of causes of action, and so you need somebody who is a self-starter, a creative legal thinker, and is willing to take risks.
What about if people are wondering if they should get another degree, like a master's in social work or public health or something like that? Is that worth it, or is it something they should be thinking about, or?
Well, I think if someone's interested in getting a master's in public health or social work, they should do it, but I wouldn't do it to try to get a job at a public interest organization like ours. I don't know that that's something. I will say that one of our most experienced attorneys does have a master's in social work too, and I think that is helpful to her, but I don't know that that's something we really look for when we hire someone.
And what about salaries?
Yeah.
That's always the thing. Public interest doesn't pay very well,
Right.
and blah, blah, blah. So
Yeah.
about that.
For a beginning lawyer, we are probably mid-30s to 40,000. I'm talking in the 0 to 1 to 2 year range. For very experienced, and then it goes on up to there to probably the mid to high 60s. Depending, and maybe. We're reviewing our salary schedule right now, so it could be higher, but probably, majority. I'd have to look at our scale again, but we have attorneys everywhere, ranging from that kind of more beginning area to the 50s to, the mid to high 60s.
And what about, the whole thing of can you have a good quality of life and have the things that you want, whatever the things are, and be in public interest? Are you sacrificing whatever? Not material, I guess material possessions, I would imagine, but that's sort of the...
I don't know. It depends what kind of material possessions you want. I don't... there are always trade-offs. I think that we tend to have fairly good mix with most of our staff. We have attorneys who probably regularly work 60 hours a week, and we have attorneys who probably regularly work 40 hours a week. I think that one of the things that I have noticed about public interest work versus private firms is I do believe that there is more flexibility. And currently, we're in the situation where we're getting more and more attorneys who want to balance their home life and spend more time with their kids. And we've created some situations where an attorney could work 30 hours a week, or someone else would like to come back at 20, and we're thinking about perhaps trying to get another attorney to job share, so that we could have 2 attorneys working 20 hours a week. We have always, when people have commitments with family, been flexed out. What I used to is we had one attorney used to work the early shift. She would come in from 6 to, in the summer, she had kids at home, she'd come in from 6 a.m. till about 9. Then she'd have to go do some things with her kids, and then she would come back in the afternoon, worked as many or more hours than most did, but we allowed for some flexibility. That may be true of some firms, but I think that it may be more true in the public interest sector. And the way I see it is, there's trade-offs. You're not making as much money where we are, but there is a high degree of collegiality, perhaps more control. I think we have a very open management structure where decisions tend to be hashed out, input requested on almost everything, more flexibility on hours and how you structure your job, coming to work in the summer in shorts. I mean, things like that are quality of life issues.
Why do you think that the firms don't do, why aren't they doing what you're doing with, do you think it's just because they can? It just seems crazy.
Well, I don't know. Maybe some firms are,
right.
And I don't want to say that large firms are not doing this.
But the culture isn't.
Yeah. Yeah. It may. Some may be expectations that when you work for a large corporate client, that somebody needs to be available and there all the time. Some of it. I think some of it may be that. There may be an expectation of a certain way to dress or look or act. And it may just be what you said at first, that there are people are, want to work at those places. They want the money and the power and prestige of working at a large firm and are willing to do that. And there's lots of rewards for that. You're working with lots of great people and learning a lot of things about the law and, getting a lot of money. So.
What if you start out in public interest and you decide you don't like it? Can you go do other things, or do you feel like if you start there, you can't do anything else?
No, you can. I started in legal services. I worked at Legal Aid as an attorney 1 year in New Mexico and 2 years in Arizona, and then worked in a private firm for 6 years, and then came back to doing public interest. So I don't think so. I know people who were at legal services for many years who ended up then being in private practice. I don't think it's a big impediment. Maybe if after 20 years you want to do something different, it might be hard. But if you're talking about 3 to 7 years, I don't think it makes much difference.
And let's come back to what we started with which was using law as social change.
Yeah.
And your thoughts about that. And do you see that that's happened? Can you use law for social change?
I think you can use law for changing systems in perhaps small increments, and that it is possible. It's a long, arduous, and often frustrating process. It's often said that getting the order from the court is the easy part. In a lot of these kinds of cases, it's the implementation that is so difficult. For example, in one of our largest cases that's been ongoing for 20 years, Arnold versus Sarn, which is a case that challenged the lack of mental health services for seriously mentally ill adults in Arizona. It went through trial, it went to the Arizona Supreme Court, there was an implementation plan afterwards, and we're still fighting to get some of the original relief in that case in the development of services. Now, a lot has happened. If you look back to when the suit was brought, people were either in the Arizona State Hospital or in crummy board and care homes where they weren't getting care, and now there are many systems of care. People have rights if they're not getting the care they need to appeal it and grieve it. There are certain standards that are required, but because the money to really effectuate all of the court order and the settlement implementation agreement has never been appropriated. I mean, more money is being appropriated, but not enough. It all hasn't been developed yet. So we are still, as attorneys, monitoring it, bringing, various court actions to try to get what the court originally ordered. So it can be frustrating in that way.
Kind of related, but a little off. A different question. How do you see a lot of things? You see a lot of, I would imagine you make lots of good differences in people's lives, but you also see a lot of sadness and a lot of struggle. And how do you internalize it? Do you take it home with you? Do you feel like you're doing good, so it's okay? Is it hard? I mean, is it emotionally hard to
I
people
think
in different struggling situations?
It's people are going through hard things and their lives are difficult, and some of those people are some of the most inspirational people I've ever met, and that people who live their lives with serious disabilities, and despite the fact that they can't walk, they have difficulty speaking, perhaps because of a cerebral palsy, have the will to get through law school and get a job, or want to fight that some restaurant wouldn't serve them because they had a service animal with them. Those are truly inspirational people. So I think their strength is more of an inspiration than their disability a source of sadness. Though certainly one of the hardest things I think that I have to do, and I often am hearing the people who are unhappy with what's happened at our center, because it's kind of the buck stops here. So if we've told somebody we can't help them on a case or whatever, and they don't like it, eventually it comes to me. So I talk to a lot of people who may initially be unhappy, and probably one of my biggest struggles is when they just can't believe it. They think it's unfair. They've been told we can't help them because there is little merit, to their claim. And I have to tell people, well, I'm sorry, but, in the United States, you don't necessarily have a right to a job, or you don't have a right to housing, or you don't necessarily have a right to health care unless you meet certain income qualifications or certain disability qualifications. And nor do you have a right to a lawyer in a civil action. And unless they're taking your children away, or they're going to lock you up in a mental institution. So that's a hard thing for people to understand, and it's a sad thing for me to say. But because it is the state of our law that certain rights that I think most people in the U.S. think they have, they really don't.
And what do you think the role of a lawyer is with clients, with your clients, with any clients? What are they supposed to be doing? What's the sort of relationship and the job in sort of a more philosophical space?
It's the. I mean, it is different. I mean, I think that it's part advocate. It's advocate to the world and perhaps teacher to your client, because we're not straight mouthpieces. And that may be clearer in the public interest setting than maybe in private practice. But even in private practice, the attorneys I know, they don't take something just because somebody's going to pay them for it. But it's to let somebody know why perhaps what they want to do doesn't make sense under the law, or might not be the best thing ultimately. But if there's an agreement that, yes, there's merit to this claim and we're going to take it, then it becomes to advocate for that person, to keep them informed of what's happening, to work with them to resolve the matter. It's really a partnership in a certain sense. I mean, as the lawyer, you have the skills to make it happen, but it has to be done in relation to what the client wants, particularly in the kinds of cases we're doing where what they may need is not, it's not just a simple matter of dollars. It may be a discharge from a hospital into a community residential placement, or it may be a therapy program for somebody, for some child, and it requires a lot of understanding of what the family or the person needs and wants.
And would you say that was true when you were doing the malpractice stuff as well? Could you translate that definition too?
Well, it was I think it was just as important there to keep the client well informed and to be in close communication and partnership with them on what happened in the case, because if you weren't and then suddenly you come up and say, well, they've offered X to settle your case, if you haven't been with the client in this the whole time, they're going to be, why that amount? So I think it's equally as important, though usually what the client may want may be more than just the money, but in that context of medical malpractice and personal injury, usually remedies are in terms of just the amount of dollars.
Mm-hmm. All right, and as we get to the end of this, we've been asking most people what, you can answer this any way you want. People have interpreted a gazillion different ways of what are one or some of your happy moments being a lawyer. And that can be at the job you have now or anything. I mean, it can be at previous jobs or what comes to mind as like some of your happiest moments in law.
You know, I always get a real moment of happiness and satisfaction at a negotiation concluded well, or an oral argument that went well, or a cross-examination or deposition where you really got a zinger. But that's more the kind of, oftentimes, the happiness of having performed well and feeling good in that, putting yourself in the public and doing well kind of way. But when I think back with happiness, it's often on results that I had that may have been little small things that didn't really, I never appeared in court on, or I never gave a speech or did a cross-examination on, but really made a big difference to someone's life. I can tell you one of them, and it's, I always think of there was a man who had been in the Arizona State Hospital for just years and years and years, and everybody thought there was no way he could ever live in a group home or be anywhere in the community because he was just too paranoid schizophrenic. And first, this is many years ago, I was doing all of this advocacy to get people new medications that were known to be effective for treatment-resistant schizophrenics. And so we did a whole advocacy campaign, and they were more expensive to try to get people on these. So first, this man, we were able to get him on this. So lo and behold, he gets better because he's finally getting a medication that works. And then I do further advocacy, and he gets out in the community, and he's living in a group home with 4 other men in Tucson who all have mental illness in a nice neighborhood, with a yard. And the last I heard, he now is able to take the bus by himself, has a girlfriend, and they're looking at even part-time work opportunities that he may be able to do. And the interesting thing about this man is, although I never knew him, he went to the same college I did in St. Louis, Washington University, and was a freshman the same year, and that was the year he became a schizophrenic. So there's something feels good about that whole thing, and I don't know, it makes me happy when I think of that.
That's a nice story. Anything else any advice or thoughts or things we haven't covered? Or
Yeah, the only thing I'd say, you asked me if people could be in public interest and then go into private practice or do other things, and I said yes. But One thing I guess I would say to law students is I have seen a lot of people who have said that they would love to go into public interest, but they feel like they can't afford it, and they initially go to a firm or something, you know, that they're going to make more money, typically a large firm. And the only concern I guess I have about that is if somebody really wants to do public interest, I sometimes think it's harder once you go down the path of being at a large firm. You get used to that, and there's lots of wonderful things about that, and it may be harder to switch back. It doesn't mean it's impossible. I know many, many people who've done it, but it would just be something that if I was a law student now I might think about.